In 1940, the Italian fascist regime established the Entity of Colonization of Sicilian Latifundium, following the model of the Entity of Colonization of Libya and colonial architecture in Eritrea and Ethiopia. These territories were considered by the regime empty, underdeveloped, and backwards, and therefore in need of being reclaimed, modernized, and repopulated. For this purpose, the Entity of Colonization inaugurated 8 new rural towns in Sicily, and as many remained unfinished. Today, most of these villages have fallen into ruin. However, what does not seem to be in ruin is the persistence of fascist, colonial, and modernist rhetoric, culture, and politics. Despite the fall of fascism following the Second World War, Italy's defascistization unfortunately remains an unfinished process. This is one of the reasons why there are many visible architectures and monuments that celebrate the fascist regime. Moreover, having lost its colonies during the Second World War, Italy has never embarked on a real process of decolonization. With the reemergence of fascist ideology in Europe, it becomes urgent to ask, what kind of heritage is the fascist, colonial, and modernist heritage? And who has the right to reuse it? Should this heritage simply be demolished, or could be reoriented towards other ends? The European colonial modern project of exploitation, segregation, and dispossession has divided the world into different races and nations, constructing its identity in opposition to other projects labeled as traditional or backwards. The suppression of alternative was and is an attempt to create a singular modernist colonial epistemology. Therefore, modernity cannot exist without the disqualification and degradation of other approaches and worldviews. In 2017, the nomination of Asmara, the capital of Eritrea, as UNESCO World Heritage Site for its modernist colonial architecture built by the fascist regime during the period of the Italian colonization, posed a series of fundamental questions for both the ex-colonized and the ex-colonizers. Who has the right to preserve, reuse, and re-narrate fascist, colonial, and modernist architecture? While architectural modernism in particular continues to be celebrated for its progressive social and political agenda, what the modernist rhetoric of progress and innovation obscure is its dark side, namely its inherent homogenizing, authoritarian, and segregational dimensions. These modernist conceptions are still present in contemporary architecture and urban planning, where in the name of modern architecture, entire communities, form of living, and historical sites are erased. While a critique of modernism alone is not enough, having already been conducted by postmodernism, the task of the present is additionally to imagine architectural form of demodernization. Through art exhibition, the creation of educational environments, architectural interventions, and text written in conversations with Emilio Di Stretti, Maya Al-Dabbagh, Charles Esche, Zoe Butt, and Walter Mignolo, we have started to reflect and speculate on forms of architectural demodernization. Demodernization for us does not relate to any anti-modernism, such as that expressed by reactionary, anti-technological, nationalist and fascist melancholies. Demodernization indeed does not mean opposing the use of electricity and wiring, or technology and infrastructure, nor the welfare that they can provide, channel and distribute. Instead, it means profaning the separations, disconnections and isolations embodied by architectural modernism. By opposing modernity's aggressive universalism, demodernization is a method of desegregation that applies as both discourse and praxis to invent form of reappropriation and reuse of modern architecture. After a decade of work in Palestine, where decolonization essentially means the practice of opposing Israel's regime of occupation, colonization, and apartheid, moving to Europe via Palestine, demodernization became our front line in the larger struggle of decolonization. And we started to understand more clearly the Italian Southern questions as a case of internal colonization. Needless to say, this connection is not new. In writing The Question of Palestine, Edward Said was influenced by Antonio Gramsci's conceptual political categories of subalternity and hegemony, developed precisely in relation to the Italian Southern question. The description of colonized subjects, including Southern Italian, as backwards, underdeveloped, uncivilized, lazy, and slow in catching up with modernity, characterize the ideological justifications for legitimizing the invasions and occupation of Libya, Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Somalia. Paradoxically, Italian settler colonialism was justified by the need to find land and work for poor Southern Italians. If Gramsci was hoping for alliances between the industrialized proletarian of the North and the farmer of the South, today, in a similar spirit, we might call for a new alliance between Southern people and immigrants. In a modest and intimate form, the work that Sandi and I have been doing together is also the result of exploration of this possibility. In recent years, the right-wing Sicilian regional government, in an effort to re-legitimize fascist policies, decided to fund the architectural conservation of the agricultural towns built by the Entity of Colonization of Sicilian Latifundia, restoring them as they were originally built. Helped by modern architectural history and restoration theories that after the Second World War cynically separated aesthetics values from social, political, economic ones, the buildings have begun to be restored as they were designed in the 1940s, reinforcing the idea that fascist architecture can exist without perpetuating fascist ideologies. In Borgo Bonsignore, for example, where the first refurbishment of the building began just a few years ago, a new plaque appeared close to the old one commemorating the heroic gesture of patriotism, in reality crimes against humanity, of General Antonio Bonsignore, who was killed during the invasion and occupation of Ethiopia. These rural towns are all named after war and fascist criminals. Borgo Rizza, for example, was named to commemorate and remember the death of a young fascist militant. Against this nostalgic and neo-fascist approach, in Borgo Rizza, we strike out the name Rizza to negate its commemoration, but at the same time not forget what it stood for, we collaborated with the local municipality of Carlentini, the local community and university to establish the Difficult Heritage Summer School, a space for critical pedagogy and discussions around practices of reappropriation and renarration. Over the years, we started to discuss with the local municipality how to turn the former Entity of Colonization of Sicilian Latifundia in Borgo Rizza into an Entity of Decolonization. These collective processes have been open to all of those who felt the urgency to question the broad historical, cultural and political heritage embedded in colonialism, fascism and modernism, and therefore begin a common path toward new practices of demodernization. Modernist architecture, both in the former colonies and in colonizing country, have been built as isolated sacred objects to be admired. Therefore, for us, it's not enough just to use them in the same ways previous regimes have used them, not simply to demolish them. They need, in fact, to be profaned, to be used against themselves and open for new common uses different from those which were designed for. Beside engagement on site in Borgo Rizza, we felt the necessity to take the conversation into other contexts, to expand the possibility to learn from different sites and build new alliances. The art installation Ente di Decolonizzazione Borgo Rizza profaned the Entity of Colonization of Sicilian Latifundia by decomposing and recomposing its facade in several modular sits. These will be reused as the platform for an open discursive space where the public is invited to critically reconsider the social, political and economic effect of fascist, colonial and modernist heritage, and at the same time collectively imagine new common uses. The first activation of the Ente di Decolonizzazione Borgo Rizza took place in May at the Mostra d'Oltremare in Napoli, which first opened in 1940, conceived as a colonial exhibition to display the territories and people overseas in area colonized by the fascist regime. It closes only 4 days after its opening. It has since had many temporary uses, including hosting refugees from the Second World War and from earthquake in the 80s, acting as a vaccination center and providing a venue for public events. The second activation of Ente di Decolonizzazione Borgo Rizza take place at the Hansa Quarter in West Berlin, built in 1957 for the International Building Exhibition, Interbau. We are interested in exploring here how modernist architecture was deployed for the representation of a democratic Germany. Today, Interbau and the Karl-Marx-Allee are on the way to becoming UNESCO World Heritage Sites for their post-war architecture and urban modernism. Successive gatherings take place in Bruxelles and Albissola Marina. This series of decolonial assemblies aims to continue our collective research by learning from different sites and by building alliances with people who feel the urgency to question modernist, colonial and fascist heritage. In processes of colonization and decolonization, architecture plays a crucial role in organizing spatial relations and expressing ideologies. And even when abandoned or in ruins, it is still mobilized as evidence for political and cultural claims. It's not possible to understand today's displacement of people, flow of migration or contemporary fascism without and through knowledge of Europe's colonial and modernist heritage.